Hello and welcome. My name is Goblin, and tonight we will be discussing goblins. We're going to be reading stories from my favorite website for first-hand paranormal experiences, Your Ghost Stories. These will not be your average tales of footsteps and shadowy figures. Those are a dime a dozen. How many people do you know that have seen a goblin? All of the stories we are reading are presented as factual accounts, but you can decide for yourself. Between stories, we will be discussing some goblins from the myth and folklore of various cultures around the world. So, let's get started with our first story of the night. It comes to us from the United Kingdom by username Jackie Rose. It's called Imps or Goblins. I don't remember how old I was when this happened, but I do know I was really young. I lived with my mother, grandmother, and baby sister in a terraced house near the seaside in the northeast of England. I remember that I was laying in a painted white wicker crib when this happened, and when I spoke to my mother about this, she said that when I was a toddler, I slept in this crib near the window. I never ever felt comfortable in that bedroom and was always scared to sleep in it. I don't remember what time of the night it was, but it must have been early evening because I got a good, clear view of the two creatures. I remember grabbing the curtain and pulling it back. I think I must have heard a noise or something to make me do this. I saw two creatures sitting on either side of the window ledge, clutching their knees with their arms. They were childlike in size, with scrawny limbs, and they both had a long, whip-like tail with a point on the end that went above their heads. They were green-colored, and it didn't look like they had skin, but rather scales. They didn't have any clothing on, and they had no fur or hair. They had a mouth full of sharp teeth and long, spindly fingers with long, sharp fingernails. They had long, pointed ears and almond-shaped eyes. There was not much of a nose, and they were chattering to each other in a language I couldn't understand. So there you have it, a first-hand goblin sighting, and a pair of goblins at that. Now, maybe they don't totally fit the classic descriptions of goblins other than the green skin and the long, pointed ears, but they are intriguing nonetheless. You may argue that because the author was so young at the time of the story, that it compromises the credibility of this alleged sighting. They may have misremembered, imagined, or dreamt this encounter. They did mention being in a crib, after all. However, there is a commenter below the story that recounts an experience they had that was remarkably similar to the one we just read. This comment reads, quote, "I'm going out on a credibility limb here admitting this, but yes, I've seen something very similar. In my early months of pregnancy, I awoke to one of these beings watching me sleep. It was crouched on the pillow next to mine. It snarled, like a snapping, guttural kind of noise from deep in its throat, then leapt into the darkness and vanished. I thought it was a goblin. Odd that what I saw is almost identical to what you remember seeing. Odd that we were both in bed, too." End quote. So this person was an adult and saw the creature. After hearing two first-hand goblin sightings, are you convinced goblins are real yet? Here's another one. Roxanne writes to us from Texas. I have heard of goblins to be more commonly found in the Philippines, but I think I may have these creatures in my house. The first incident happened just a few days ago. My sister was carrying around a pair of winged plastic horses. She was playing with them all day long while I was on the computer. My sister called me out, saying she had lost the horses, that she left them on the couch's arm and turned her back, and then they were just gone. I told her that they must have fallen over, and she refused to look for them. So I ended up poking my hands under the couch, scanning the floor. I even moved furniture around, and ended up looking over the whole house. I searched on both of our beds, then went back to the living room to tell my sister that her horses were nowhere to be found. I came back to my room, shutting the door as my sister cried her guts out. I laid on my bed and felt something. I threw over the covers to find the pair of horses that were missing. Could it be a goblin? At nights, I hear a deep, sort of growling voice from behind the wall. I've tried a knocking session, but instead I hear a deep, laughing voice. So, I know this isn't the greatest story after the previous one. No goblin is actually seen, and pretty much every commenter and myself are left wondering, why exactly did you think this was a goblin? However, I was instantly amused by the first line of the story. Quote, I have heard of goblins being more commonly found in the Philippines, end quote. I've never heard that. Is that something people know to be true? That goblins are common in the Philippines? And lo and behold, someone comments on this, confirming the presence of goblins in the Philippines. Black Moon Mage says, quote, yes, it's true that goblins, or what we call Nuno sa Punso, are common here, end quote. Now I am downright intrigued, and I had to look up more information. Nuno sa Punso are also known as Old Men of the Mound, and their name directly translates from Tagalog to ancestor in the anthill. They are small creatures, about 3 feet tall, that resemble old men with flowing beards who reside in anthills. They are ancient nature spirits and must be treated with utmost respect, or else they will inflict curses on trespassers. They dwell near the anthill mounds, but since they are invisible to human eyes, you must say the phrase tabi tabi po as you approach, so that the Nuno sa Punso move aside and are not trampled on. If you fail to do so, and kick, trample, or urinate on the anthill, your body will be struck with afflictions such as pain and swelling, and you may vomit or urinate blood. To cure the illnesses inflicted by the Nuno sa Punso, you must visit a folk healer or witch doctor who will diagnose your afflictions as Nuno sa Punso curses and advise you to offer food, drink, or even an animal sacrifice. It is possible to kill the creatures by crushing them between your thighs, although it is not advised, as you could anger the wrath of further dwarves. These legends are a way of teaching children to respect and preserve nature, as Nuno sa Punso may be also offended by the felling of trees and tampering with virgin earth. Although they are normally invisible, if you are pure of heart, the Nuno sa Punso may reveal themselves to you. Urbanization is said to have caused them to flee the area, descend further into the earth, and even die out. The Nuno sa Punso may not seem like the traditional goblin to those in the Western world, and more so resemble dwarves. The reason the commenter on the story likened them to goblins is probably because Nuno sa Punso is interchangeable with the word duende, which means goblin. Duende come in many different varieties, and are found not only in Filipino folklore, but also in Spain, Portugal, Belize, and Mexico. Let's read another account from your ghost stories. This one is written by Cheyenne in New York. It's called Little Green Gremlin. At around the age of 5 or 6, I lived alone with my mother in New York City. My mother's part of the family had a history of women who were experts in ghosts, saints, and seeing into the future. It was probably around 9 or 10 at night, and my mom tucked me in for bed. The house was really dark, and I asked for a glass of water. My mother left to go to the kitchen. I waited for her and looked around the room when something caught my eye. At the top of the closet, a swirling green misty orb wafted over a pair of large black boots that belonged to my father. It had appeared out of thin air, and I watched, terrified, as the orb constructed itself into what looked like 2 little green feet, then green pants, a small jacket or vest, and then finally a head that had a thick, whitish-greenish beard and a pointed hat. He looked very old, with beady eyes and wrinkles pulling at his pointed nose. From what I saw, it looked angry. It opened its mouth, but made no noise. Its eyes were cold, and it looked very interested in my father's shoes. He tried putting his feet in them, but kept walking right out of them, like his ghostly state couldn't allow him to physically wear the shoes. He tried multiple times, but couldn't put them on, and he became more and more frustrated. Finally, he gave up and threw a small tantrum. Then he heard my mother walking back to the room and vanished. Since then, I have never seen him again. When I told my family about the experience later in life, my uncle said he too had seen a little gremlin when he was young, and it would stare at him with small green eyes when he was trying to sleep. As you can see by now, goblins aren't always described as we have typically come to know them. Green, pointed ears, large toothy grins. Goblins across cultures are united by their mischievous nature and their love of playing tricks on humans and general malevolence. A fascinating example of this comes from a town in Spain called Zaragoza, or Zaragoza. In 1934, an apartment building housed several families, one of which was the Palazón family, who lived on the 2nd floor. One day in September, their maid, Pascuala Alocer, was lighting the kitchen stove when a voice called out from inside,
"You are hurting me!"
When Pascuala recoiled in horror and ran to the living room where the Palazón family was listening to the radio, they all heard the voice say,
The lights! I cannot see!"
This would mark the start of a mysterious haunting that would go on for 2 months in the house, where a disembodied voice that seemed to emanate from nowhere could be heard throughout the entire building and would be heard cackling, chattering, mocking, and threatening. At first, it was described that the voice sounded like a little girl, but changed to a guttural growl. At night, the voice would wake the tenants up from sleep, calling out for them to turn on the light. Sometimes it would laugh in a deep voice that shook the entire building. Other times, it would join in on conversations being had in rooms of the building, and it would even answer questions. When asked, "Where are you?" the voice would answer,
"In the stove."
The disembodied voice was not heard only by the Palazón family, but by other tenants of the building as well, and even nearby neighbors and passers-by. After several days of this disturbance, the police were called, to which the voice shouted,
"What?"
The voice was questioned by police, and it answered that it did not want money, it was not a man, and it could show itself, but they, quote,
"would not like what you say."
Plumbers and masons were called to the building, trying to find the perpetrator of the voice. When a worker was sent to measure the stove, the voice said,
"You need not trouble yourself. The diameter is just 6 inches."
After finding the voice to be correct, the worker fled at once in terror. The story of the haunting quickly got to the press and was spread internationally, with papers dubbing it the Goblin of Zaragoza, as many Spanish peoples believed the culprit to be a duende. Visitors would come from all across Europe and gather outside the house to hear the ghoulish voice. Local government and law enforcement officials had grown weary of the media circus and spectacle of the matter, and wanting to put a stop to it, they placed blame on the Palazzone family's maid, Pasquala, claiming that she was unconsciously throwing her voice. She vehemently denied having anything to do with it, and even though the voice was still heard when Pasquala was taken away from the building, she was publicly condemned and ostracized from the community, becoming a hermit who maintained her innocence for the rest of her life. After a few months, the voice stopped suddenly, and the story faded into obscurity. The original building was torn down, and a new building replaced it, which was named Edificio Duende, the Goblin Building. There's a comment under the last story we read I'd like to share. The username of that poster is Kid, and they write, quote, "This sounded more like a leprechaun. You know, Rumpelstiltskin. We had this kind of green goblin in Malay. It's called Toyol, but they only steal money and suck on the victim's toe. Look it up too if you're interested. Cheers." End quote. Of course I am. How many toe-sucking goblins have you heard of? Malay peoples are indigenous to Sumatra, an island in Indonesia, coastal regions of Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula. Today, the population of Malay's people is 27 million, with the majority inhabiting Southeast Asia. In Malay culture, there are shamans who practice traditional medicine, and also act as spirit mediums and, on occasion, sorcerers. It is from the shaman that you would obtain the Toyol. A Toyol looks much like a traditional Western goblin. Green skin, long, pointed ears, clouded eyes, and rows of sharp teeth. The images that come up with an internet search of Toyol are quite comical. There's several photographs of children painted green with wide eyes, sharp teeth, pointed ears, and their hands raised up like claws. This creature commonly appears in movies and television, and while the photos may seem a little silly to those outside of Malay culture, the legend of the Toyol is really quite disturbing. The Toyol is small, about the size of a human baby, usually naked or nearly so with a large head. And that is because it is the deformed, reanimated corpse of an aborted child. The deceased baby is acquired by the sorcerer, who seals it in a jar with some oils and other magical materials needed to reanimate the corpse. The sorcerer may then keep the Toyol for themselves or sell them to greedy families. For a Toyol's sole purpose is to go out at night and rob others or harass them. The Toyol is not normally known to kill, as it can't really do much harm due to its infantile size. They do also, as the commenter in the last story mentioned, suck the blood from people's toes as they sleep. Their small stature does come in handy for sneaking around and retrieving hidden valuables without being seen. If valuable objects go missing from a person's home, a Toyol is usually suspected. Luckily, there are some measures one can take to keep a Toyol at bay. They fear several things: needles, broken glass, and their reflection. You can also distract them by putting out marbles or hanging strips of garlic over your door. The Toyol will stop to play with them and forget its task. It is a baby, after all. As for the owners of the Toyol, there are rules to being its keeper. First of all, it needs a small bit of blood, which it can either suck from a toe or a woman's breast. Next, a black candle and incense. Third, a cup of milk every morning. And lastly, all a child's favorite things: candy, cookies, and toys. Because of these rules, one of my sources suggested that the film Gremlins was loosely inspired by the legend of the Toyol. And how long does a Toyol stick around? Well, forever. Seriously, families will pass down the Toyols through generations as an heirloom. If you decide you want to get rid of it, You can either bury the jar, cast it into the sea, or simply let it free. Without a master, they are essentially harmless, and will wander around the jungle, spying on people for fun, and breaking into homes to play with toys. Now, let's read another first-hand account from Your Ghost Stories. This one is by Alex B. from Virginia, and it's called An Elf Tale. From what I can remember, it was never a scary house. From the outside, it looked normal enough. A little one-story with a well-manicured lawn, fenced-in backyard, and garage. It was owned by my mother's friend, who I lovingly called my aunt. As far as bad experiences go, I have none to recall prior to the day my aunt moved from the house. That day, however, is a different story. I don't recall much about the day my aunt and mother packed up the house, but I do remember being asked to go into the spare bedroom and retrieve some blankets. The spare bedroom was a little secluded room in the front of the house that was accessible only by going down a hallway that also doubled as the laundry room. The washer and dryer sat in a closet, and above them was a little door to the attic. I was far too little to reach this door. Even if I was to stand on top of the washer and reach with my arms outstretched, it was impossible. To my surprise, when I walked past the laundry, I saw the closet doors had been opened with the attic door ajar and the light on. I had been in and out of the house all day and knew that not one person had been into the attic, so I found this to be a little strange. I continued on my way to the room, where I gathered the blankets and then headed back into the hallway. As I was leaving, I looked up into the open attic, and there appeared a man. To this day, his appearance has always baffled me, for he was not so much a man, but an elf-like creature. He wore his hair long, and over it was a pointed hat. His clothes were tattered, and I could remember them being green. His skin was brown, and his eyes black, and he was no taller than 3 feet. He was not a lean creature, and was actually quite round about the middle. He sat hunched over the square opening of the attic, looking down at me with a malicious grin. I froze.
Come here, little girl,
he said, to which I did not respond. His voice, I remember, was a harsh one, high-pitched, but at the same time deep and threatening. Even as a child, I knew that what I was seeing was not human, and it was not good. I stood there in a sort of paralyzed state, staring at this thing in the attic for what seemed an eternity, while he again and again repeated,
come here, little girl. Come up here, little girl.
Then, as if my brain was finally able to get through to my feet, I ran. I could hear him laughing as I took off, a dangerous laugh, one that to this day will raise the hairs on my arms and neck. Immediately, I told my mother and aunt what I had experienced, and they just as immediately wrote me off as having an overactive imagination. After much pleading, I got them into the hallway, where lo and behold, the attic door was open and lights still on, but the little man I had described to my mother and aunt had vanished. The author of this story may not identify this creature as a goblin, but I'm going to take the liberty of classifying it as such. And some people in the comment section agree with this classification. There's even a mention of duendes from a poster called Nightingale 23. Let's read their comment. Quote, "This story gives me the chills. Being Hispanic and born in a small sort of remote place in Mexico in the Sierra Gorda, which is a vast wilderness. I spent 10 years of my life there, and as children, we were very acquainted with these types of stories, and the belief in what we call duende, a creature that lured children into the woods. Nothing ever happened to me, but there were accounts of children missing, just to end up in the middle of nowhere. My great-uncle was almost lured by one of them. He said the duende wanted to play with him, and kept taking him deeper into the woods, until he ran away back home before he got too far. He said they were naked and looked like children." End quote. I absolutely love being able to learn about and peer into other people's cultures through stories and comments like this. We know now that goblins can be found across the world, but can they also come from outer space? On August 21st, 1955, in a farmhouse between the towns of Kelly and Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a large extended family were visiting with relatives who were passing through town as traveling carnival workers. That evening, Billy Ray Taylor went to fetch water from a nearby well, and as he did, he saw a silver object floating through the sky and descending into a local clearing. It appeared to be engulfed in flames, and trailing exhaust that was rainbow-colored. When Billy Ray got back to the farmhouse and told the others what he saw, they quickly dismissed him for telling tall tales. However, it was not long after that, the family dog began whimpering and barking at something outside. When the dog was let outside to investigate, they quickly hid under the house and could not be coaxed out. Billy Ray and a resident of the house, Lucky Sutton, went outside with a double-barrel shotgun, and they saw, approaching the farmhouse, a strange green, glowing light. As it grew closer, they found that the light was emanating from a small creature, about 3 feet in height. It was described as having long, pointed ears, yellow, glowing eyes on either side of its head, spindly legs, long arms with claw-like hands that hung nearly down to the ground, and silver skin or clothing all over its body. The two men fired their shotgun at the creature, but it merely knocked it over, and the creature, unharmed, retreated back into the shadows. And Lucky and Billy Ray subsequently retreated back into the farmhouse. Inside, matriarch of the home, Glennie Langford, was flung back in terror as she saw one of the creatures peering in at her from the window. Billy and Lucky went outside again, and a claw reached down from the roof to grab a fistful of Lucky's hair. Looking up to find a creature perched on the roof, he took a shot at it, and again, no harm came to the being. Only a metallic ping as the bullet bounced off of it, and it floated strangely down to the ground and vanished. With that, the whole family made a run for it to their vehicles, observing strange glowing lights all about the trees surrounding the house. They drove to the Hopkinsville police station, excitedly spewing accounts of what had taken place, and several police officers, state troopers, and even army from the local military base came to investigate the property, finding only extensive damage from the frantic gunfire issued by Lucky and Billy Ray. This alleged UFO sighting has become known as the Kelly-Hopkinsville incident, or the Hopkinsville Goblins, because of the goblin-like appearance of the creatures reportedly seen. Its validity has been long debated, but the story has had great cultural influence in modern media, most notably so for popularizing the term "little green men," as this phrase was regurgitated by newspapers covering the story in reference to the glowing green light emanating from the creatures. It also provided loose inspiration for the 1986 film Critters, and even a Pokemon, Sableye, was modeled after the description of the Hopkinsville Goblins, which are apparently quite famous in Japan. In the end, there are logical explanations attributed to most of what occurred, and skeptics put it all down to bioluminescent fungus, meteors, and aggressive great horned owls. But you and I know the truth. That's all the stories I have for you tonight. Now you know there are goblins to be found all over the world, and even worlds beyond. And you aren't safe from goblins inside your homes. They could be in your closet, in your attic, in your stove. But you know what to do. Say tabby tabby po. Put out some marbles or some toys, and if you feel a little suckling on your toe at night, don't worry. They only need a couple drops. Until next time.